Okay, hi friends. I'm going back to my old smartphone camera, so the quality's not going to be as great. But here I am. I don't know. I think it's the nice new camera I bought. There's a weird connection problem. Maybe it's because I downloaded OBS, which is great free share software, except I'm not correctly connecting OBS into how I live stream. I'm not sure. I need to still figure out OBS. So I don't know if that, because I started setting up OBS last night, but I didn't get all the way through the configuration process, so I don't know if that's the problem, or it's just I have a really bad connection now. If it's just the bad connection, I'll probably cut out on this too, but here we are. Okay, so I'm going to try it for the third time now, and I need to make this a public setting. Great. Am I not on a public setting? Let's see. I guess I'm trying to rush to get through this, then I should just take my time and make sure I'm doing it right. Nope, I'm again on private setting, public. Is that going to cut me out? Let me hit reload. It says I'm on public setting now. Let me reload. Yep, I'm still there, and it's on public setting. Okay, so this is the sixth and final part of my live stream series, Racism 101 for White People. The two topics I'm going to talk about in some detail on this one are white fragility and obtaining unity through justice. So let me recap the first 5 parts, and you can go to my YouTube channel. I think you just go to YouTube and type in my name, Pete Perry, and it should come up. You should see it. And so the 5 most recent videos have been parts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in this series, Racism for White People. Part 1, I talked about a recent incident that happened in Richmond, Virginia, at a national anti-war conference. There was a session that was organized by Black Alliance for Peace, and there's something very unfortunate that came out of that. I'm not going to rehash that because there's now dozens of left-leaning or progressive live streamers that have talked about it in some great detail, and you can go back to the previous parts in these series and see that. So that mainly I was explaining organizing, black-only organizing spaces and safe spaces for marginalized communities, and why those are still necessary, and the progressive, so-called progressive movement or left movement should respect the need for those spaces, and that they're sort of a requirement to be able to work people that come from marginalized communities that have been systematically and violently oppressed throughout history and still face severe discrimination on it. And I'm fading out a connection there, so let me see. Try and maintain connection here. So, and then part 2 was the first part of basically the second part was basically the first part of white supremacy in the U.S. 1619. When the first African slaves were brought into Jamestown, the colony in Virginia, to 1876, which was the ending of the Reconstruction period in the South, which happened directly after the Civil War. Part 3 was the second half of the history of white supremacy in the U.S., which went from 1877 up to 2014 with the murder of the teenager Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. Modern movement that's known as Black Lives Matter, or in DC, the local chapter here is taking on the name The Movement. And so went through all of that. I went through the whole history of the white supremacist system that is basically at the very foundation of our entire nation. The economy in the first half of U.S. history obviously was built upon essentially slave labor. At first, the first few decades, mostly indentured servants, but then that was replaced by straight-out slavery. the agricultural economy in the South, but many, many, many parts of the industrial economy in the North, too. Building trains and factories and so forth were also built on the backs of slaves, or recently freed black men that were paid pennies to the dollar compared to their white counterparts. And that was part 3. The second part of that history, part 4, was talking about what it means to be a white ally, a white accomplice, and how you can go about that. I would recommend people to go back. I had a good checklist in that. I had also a series of questions you can ask yourself to challenge yourself to become a better white ally, better white accomplice. And that brought me up to part 5, where I tried to get into this modern organizing method of intersectionality, and specifically discussing environmental racism and economic racism. And in that, I showed that what I mentioned earlier, the huge income disparity between black and brown Americans and their white counterparts is still enormous. Enormous. The average income wage is between a white family and a black family, or a Hispanic family and a white family, is still by like over $100,000 total income over a year. And so that brings us to this part, which is discussing white fragility and unity through justice. Now, I've mentioned in a few other, at least a couple of previous parts, I discussed white denialism, and that I think that we're actually in like a third wave of white denialism in modern times. Modern white denialism, I'll say. So the first wave of modern white denialism, I believe, was during when affirmative action laws and ordinances and policy, really it's not really laws in many places, mostly policies of institutions, universities, and some companies have sort of an affirmative action policy, and those ordinances and so forth. In the early to mid 80s, those came about, and there was a white lash against that, and people using that as an excuse to say, well, we've sort of solved racism, we don't have racism anymore. In fact, those folks are like getting benefits that are there. They have one leg up against us when we go up for a job interview or some bullshit. That was the first wave of modern white denialism. I'd say the second wave of modern white denialism was the election of Barack Obama. And, basically saying, well, we have a black president now, so we live in, and this phrase came up, we live in a post-racial society, which really makes me laugh. It's such bullshit. And then white denialism now is really like white fragility gone crazy, I think. It's sort of like the continued existence of white supremacy, telling their allies of color that they're being disruptive or sowing division, and that really we should just face the elite and let's strip down classism to its basic basic skeleton and simplify it to death. And that's not, you can't simplify classism to death. There's always other elements such as race, gender, and so forth that play into that. So it's really this overly simplified, like, let's move on and just get to unity already. And, it's the Black Lives Matter movement. Let's just start saying all lives matter, because that's really all lives do matter, right? So it's very dismissive, and it's kind of like white fragility gone crazy. And what I mean by that is, like, white fragility is when you get very defensive about hearing about racial issues. Let me see. There's 2 questions that you can ask yourself, like, am I playing into white fragility? Let me look up those are really well written here in this one article I found. There are more questions, but let me start with 2 of them. Like, when you're in a multiracial space, would it be an activism organizing meeting or a social setting, and the issue of like race relations come up and whatnot. But one question is, am I trying to change the subject? So ways you could try and change the subject are by saying like, you could say all lives matter, like I just said, and then another one is, why are we talking about this when we've got blank to worry about? We've got climate change to worry about. We've got chemtrails to worry about. We've got, my own little pet issue to worry about. So why are we talking about racism? That's so. And the other big question you can ask yourself is, am I using inappropriate humor to deflect? I've seen this a lot too. I've seen white folks try and be like hip in their humor and try and like dance away from any serious look at racial issues. And so, I've seen that happen a lot. So, and then, it's just the defensiveness that's out there and the dismissiveness too. I mean, what happened in Richmond, and I've seen now with other live streamers, they kind of they like analyze it to death and try and use like rationality to dismiss some very real concerns. And it's just, it's getting away from the real issue. The issue is that white supremacy does exist, and no matter how defensive you get about it or how much you want to try and deny, it's there. And as left-leaning folks, if we like to call ourselves progressives, then we need to deal with it straight up. It's an issue of justice, and it has to be dealt with. To me, it's essential of trying to consider yourself a progressive. You have to be, aware of these issues and be up on it. So I like showing little clips of interesting videos that I think can spark ideas and further conversation. So I'm going to go to Jane Elliott again, who I've used before. Great anti-racism educator. And this piece is pretty interesting to get to the point of white fragility.
If somebody stood over you, you knew it was going to happen every day? Or you expected it to happen every day? Or it happened when you didn't expect it to? Or it happened to your kids every day? After it happened to your mother every day? Now, getting right along. Your hand is still up. You still didn't learn anything, did you? Didn't I just say when your hand is up, you are thinking of what you're going to say instead of what's being said? Didn't I just say that?
Yes, you did.
And did you hear that?
Yes, I did.
And did you decide that you were just going to do it your way?
I was.
Wait a minute, you're on a roll
yes,
there for
I
a minute.
did.
Thank you very
yes,
much.
Yes, I did.
Now, since you choose to not listen to others, what do you suppose we're going to do where you're concerned?
Well, listen to me.
Thank you very much.
May I finish what I was saying,
no,
please?
Because you're still thinking of what you're going to say instead of what I'm saying. Now, getting right along.
I heard what you were saying.
You're doing it again.
What you were saying.
You're doing it again.
I don't care.
You're doing it again.
It's wrong.
You're doing it again.
Persecuted her for standing out.
You're doing it again.
Persecuted him for standing out. The only change that ever happens is when people stand out, and I am
Martin Luther King Jr. was shot. Are you in any physical danger here? Are you in any physical danger here? Is that girl in any physical danger here? Emmett Till was hanged by his neck after he was beaten almost to death, simply because he made a statement to a white woman. People at this institution...
You've made your point, you're right.
Yeah, thank you very much. What is my point that I've made?
That you can't make generalizations about any place because there's racism everywhere.
That's right. And while it may be... No. You don't come back in here until you've apologized to every person in this room. Because you just exercised a freedom that none of these people of color have. When these people of color get tired of racism, they can't just walk out, because there's no place in this country where they aren't going to be exposed to racism. They can't even stay in their own homes and not be exposed to racism if they turn on the television. But you, as a white female, when you get tired of being judged and treated unfairly on the basis of your eye color, you can walk out that door. And you know it won't happen out there. You exercised a freedom they don't have. If you're going to be in here, you're going to apologize to every black person in this room. And do it now.
I'm
And
sorry.
the Latinos, every person of color.
Racism, this country.
Bullshit! No, you're not going to say, I'm sorry there's racism. You're going to apologize for what you just did.
And so she had the freedom to walk out and escape, basically escape the pseudo reality that was being created there by Jane Elliott. It's a practice that she uses blue eyes versus brown eyes, and so she has the blue eyes. She sets up a pseudo society where the blue-eyed people are systematically discriminated against, and the brown-eyed people are given preferential treatment in just about every aspect. And so that came about. She couldn't bear the discrimination anymore that she was encountering, and she walked out. It's like, I'm going to just check out a reality. Well, and ask yourself, why am I getting defensive that this conversation about racial relations is coming up? And ask yourself, am I any physical danger here? A lot of your black allies or accomplices at some point have felt to be in physical danger. That's what it's like living in a white supremacist system. The fear of physical harm being done to your person. So yeah, that's a powerful video clip, and folks can't just check out a reality and just not be part of it. They're subjected to systematic racism, and it's it's their reality. I was going to show a clip of James Baldwin debating William F. Buckley in Cambridge, but I decided not to use it. It's a pretty long piece, and I didn't want to drag this out too long. But he basically, when James Baldwin is speaking, he's speaking from experience, and he can describe how the American dream was built on the blood, sweat, lives of black folks, and they got nothing in return. They cannot partake in the American dream, but they played such an essential role in building it. And he could speak from experience of being a black man from America. It was very powerful, but it was long, like I said. So, so what I'm seeing is sort of this in the left movement, or the so-called progressive movement, this need to move beyond history and to say that we are somehow disconnected from history. And you can't do that. We're a product of our history. And whenever the issues of reparations come up, people say, well, we can't do that. That's not how things work. Or, yes, you can do that. In 1988, actually, Ronald Reagan he signed into law a reparations system for the descendants of Japanese Americans that were interned in the internment camps during World War II. And each of those, I think it was determined to be about 60,000 Japanese Americans that were descended directly from people that were taken those internment camps. Each one of them received a cash payment of $20,000 and included an apology from the President of the United States. It was Ronald Reagan. That's like probably the only time I agreed with anything that Ronald Reagan ever did during his presidency. And so, yeah, and the income or the wealth gap also has to do about inheritance. And white folks, we've accrued wealth over a long period, over many generations. Black folks, first through slavery, then through severe Jim Crow laws and segregation and so forth, and continued discrimination, can't pass on that level of wealth to that. So beyond just the income gap, there's this gap in generational inheritance too. So that's part of history that we're still connected to. We can't ever disconnect ourselves from history, and the notion that we somehow could, or we should just move on, or we should accept the really status quo of, well, that's just the way it works, or we can't be in the business of giving handouts. That's bullshit, and that's, in my mind, in my opinion, turning our backs on a pursuit of justice that's very important. I think reparations are needed. I think reparations, there can be a discussion about it. It can take many forms. It doesn't have to be a cash payment. It could be debt relief. It could be debt relief in many different forms. It could be free college tuition, cancellation of student loans, cancellation of mortgage payments, or it could be 10 or 15 years of tax relief that people that are descendants of slaves would not have to pay federal income tax for 10 or 15 years. So it could be many other things than just cash handouts. But I think that justice needs to be obtained in this matter to help dismantle white supremacy and to unite the left movement, really, to be honest with you. I think it's a matter of justice, and if we call ourselves progressives, that has to be in the forefront of what we're fighting for. Before we can get to really working together on climate change, battling climate change, or really discussing about how we're going to, well, my hope is bring down the plutocracy and forever end the massive income disparity in this country. You have to get to these issues of justice to truly unify people. The most marginalized communities, black and brown folks, need to see that as a united movement that we're going to put those issues of basic justice at the forefront. So I'm going to read you the definition of justice here I found online through dictionary.com. Justice, noun, the quality of being just, righteousness, equitableness, or moral rightness. 2, rightfulness of or lawfulness, as of a claim or title, justness of ground or reason. 3, the moral principle determining just conduct. So how are we conducting ourselves? And how are we being righteous? These are all, like, I read those words, and it's all qualities that left-leaning movement or the so-called progressive movement likes to think of themselves as promoting, for fighting for those causes. So again, I don't think we can get away from that. I don't think we can get away from history. We're a product of history, and we need to accept that. And I don't think we can get away from what, pursuing justice is truly about. So when we're faced with a system of white supremacy, it's not to say, oh, no, I'm a, that's another point I want to get to, this whole binary, good people, bad people, or racist, not racist, or whatever. That's kind of like white fragility too, is to set up this system of binary, it's an interesting article. I posted that earlier, one of the articles about sugarcoating white fragility. It had like a graph there, and that dealing with racism in such a binary matter is like another form of, just white fragility. So I'm trying to bring that up right now. Oh, this is my laptop starts moving slow like the last time. I'm sorry, like the previous part 5 was a mess, and I'm sorry there's so many technical mess ups, and even this one, like, I need to figure out this camera because it's a nice camera I bought, but didn't want to connect to my internet connection for some reason. So yeah, I talked about our connection to history, which is, we can't divorce ourselves of that at all. Where's this thing? This whole binary, trying to make racism just a strictly binary thing. And that's kind of like a tendency I've seen within the progressive movement or left movement, is this tendency to talk in things in very binary, very simplistic, stripped down terms. And it's like we're not only losing like critical thinking skills, which is proven, like our school systems don't really teach critical thinking skills anymore, which is a shame. We're taught to take tests, and that's what our standard achievement is all based on, is studying towards a test instead of like reasoning and actual critical thinking skills. But beyond that, we're also like missing like nuance and being able to understand the important nuance of issues, and that not everything is strictly X or Y, 1 or 0, binary. That's not how the world is. That's divorcing yourself from reality, in my opinion. So this spreadsheet, like, it's called the new racism, the binary. So racist equals bad, not racist equals good. So racist equals bad. Ignorant, bigoted, prejudiced, mean-spirited, old, Southern. Not racist equals good. Educated, progressive, open-minded, well-intended, young, Northern. You see how that's bullshit? We do not live in a binary world. We don't. We just don't. So yeah, you see how progressive is there on the good side? It's like, yeah, we want to feel good about ourselves. We're going to call ourselves progressive, but not like question anything in our own like problematic behavior of how we engage in white denialism, how we center ourselves in a space that is primarily should be for black folks trying to organize during the anti-war conference, the one workshop they had set up for themselves, and we need to like somehow become the centerpiece in there. That's like total bullshit. We need to call ourselves out on that and call each other out on that. If we truly, are a so-called progressive movement. And connections fading in and out, but I'm back again. So it's like, and then we're othering like the ignorant people, like, oh, those Trumpers or those people in like rural Alabama, those are the bad people. I'm not like them. I'm like from the city and young and hip. That's bullshit. It's just another way to try and make us feel good about ourselves with actually escaping from any like critical self-analysis. And that's how we grow as individuals, is to actually have some humility and ability to do some self-criticism, really, to be honest. Some actual well-thought-out self-analysis. And if you're just going to prop yourself up and other the other people that you see as problematic and that you're so far different than them, it's just a very simplistic world. And it's a very binary escape from a very complex world. So that's what I was saying about how do we get to unity, is by, talking about these issues seriously, fighting for justice in a consistent manner, putting issues of justice front and foremost, if we want to call ourselves progressive. As a left-leaning movement, we have to do that. And that's how we get to unity, is that we're serious about justice. And for me, that does include reparations for descendants of slaves. It is. And reparations, like I said, can be many different forms. There has to be a conversation about it. So that's it. I mean, let me see if I can see people's comments here. Are there any questions folks have, or because I don't want to sign off too. I'm trying to think if I missed anything. Yeah, that was take 3. Kelly Morrissey, gray, non-linear. Yeah, I mean, there's 1,001 shades of gray, obviously. Non-linear, yes and no. I think history is linear. We don't have to study history in a linear manner, but the course of history basically is linear. Now, obviously, when we analyze things, it doesn't have to be done in a linear manner. But yes, 1,001 shades of gray. Good old boys in Texas don't like this feed. Well, there's probably some progressive living in Vermont in her little cabin there that doesn't like this feed either. Again, let's not other people just because they happen to be white and from Alabama or Mississippi. Actually, I met some really fucking cool, righteous, progressive white Southerners out there. And I've met some really ignorant people from like Boston and Chicago and whatnot. Again, nuance, subtleties. It's not all binary. Any other questions? Thank you for sharing this out. I just want to say that, like, why is this so hard for people? Why do people, they get hurt so easily? Their white fragility, they wear it on their heartstrings or their, what is it? And you can see it. It's like, why? Why do you get so defensive and upset about these? Are issues that are very real, are black allies and accomplices who are dear to the movement, can play such an incredibly important role in the movement, still feel often like they're in physical danger. They're driving down wherever. Maybe their taillight goes out. Maybe they're thinking their taillight is out and that a cop might pull them over at any point and hold a fucking gun to their head. Do we white guys ever think of that shit? No. Okay, so wake the fuck up. I mean, you like to call yourselves woke, but anyways, that's another issue. I brought that up on my Facebook page, a conversation about what woke meant and who wanted to justify the fact that they want to promote themselves as woke. But anyways, it's like, have some realization of all the privileges you have, and that if you're a progressive, you should be pissed off that not everybody has those privileges, but they don't, because it's a white supremacist system. It just seems like so obvious things. This is like, well, this is why this series is called Racism 101. I feel like I have to point out the obvious to people. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to sound snotty or full of myself, but it's like, come on, people, please try and figure this out. It's really not that hard. It's really not that hard. And if you're going to really promote yourself as like being for peace and justice and equity and, you know, act upon that. Do what's right. That's all I can say about that. Trying to, maybe if hit reload. I don't know, my browser's acting like weird. I want to see if there's other, like, I am still in public. Okay, good. Setting on. So, thank you, folks who shared this out. Oh, Kelly, you made a video. Okay. That's the exact example I gave. The video I made for her regarding privilege. Right. Okay, Jackie. Yeah, I think people personalize things a lot. And maybe you really shouldn't be personalizing this completely. We're talking about demographics. We're talking about history, systems of oppression. And yeah, maybe you shouldn't personalize everything. But at the same point, you should be aware of what the other person has dealt with their whole life. That's what's more important. And then instead of centering your own, like, hurt feelings or defensiveness, try and get out of that box. Yeah, so I think I'm going to wind it down here. This is sort of a short piece, but I felt like it was very basic. Came full circle to just basic things. During the series, I've encouraged humility, empathy, challenging yourself to some critical self-analysis. I know there's been points where I've centered myself instead of hearing what my black allies or black accomplices were trying to say. This came up recently about the people's movement, and really I should have tried to take myself out of the equation to see what my friend, who's a person of color, was trying to say to me. And she had truth to say, and I was just so, like, centered in myself. And I'm glad that I could finally realize that, hey, I need to try and take myself out of this picture and just listen to the message. And that's so important. It's just, like I said, deep listening, like really, really trying to get to a point with empathy. And even, even before you can get to empathy, you have to start really listening and not think about what you want to say next. Again, that was important in the Jane Elliott video there too. She was pointing out, she's like, no, you're just only thinking about what you're going to say next. You're not listening to what's being really discussed right now here in this moment. So that's part of the equation too. Some very basic common sense skills. Anyhow, I am going to sign off now. I don't know what I'm going to discuss about next. I might discuss Guantanamo, and then now the history of Guantanamo going on 15 years now. It was opened in January 11th, more than 15 years. So this past January would have been 15 years that the Guantanamo Gulag has gone on. So there's a whole history in that, and many of the men, before they even got to Guantanamo, were systematically tortured in CIA-run black sites. That's all been accounted for and recorded in the Senate Intelligence Report on that whole matter. I might talk about that. I might talk about up-and-coming mobilizations. There's a mobilization a little later this month about Medicare for All, and I could discuss maybe the differences between the public option, which I guess Bernie Sanders is now finally introducing in the Senate, and the Medicare for All single-payer option, which is H.R. 676 on the Hill side. So they're not the same, different. Or I could talk about other systems of oppression. I could talk about what it means. I could get a little bit into my history of what it means to be a gay man and encountering homophobia, and defending some of my trans friends against transphobia. There's an incident that came up really unfortunate recently that somebody within the left movement, or the so-called progressive movement, who really loves to pride himself as a progressive, said something very hurtful. That was extremely homophobic, and he refused to apologize for it and said he would just continue using it. So there's a lot of problematic people in the movement. Oh, that's what I wanted to say. Another live streamer who's done some really good work. Again, try to simplify everything, I think, in a way, and say that these are purity tests that we're doing. That's another kind of white fragility thing. So why are you trying to do this purity test? We should all just put aside our gripes and just move on to the next chapter and work together, because yes, the 1%'s trying to divide us. No, we're dividing ourselves by dismissing real issues of white supremacy and so forth. We're in many ways sowing the seeds if we don't address this very real issue, in my opinion. So that's really why I did this series. I think it's that important. I think it's something that we just can't dismiss or gloss over. That's bullshit. And in fact, that's helping prop up a continued system of white supremacy if we just gloss over it. We can't. It has to be addressed, and it has to be disassembled. So that's why I did this series. I thought it was that important, and it is. It really is. Like I said, people's lives are on the line. Young folks are getting pulled over and shot just for being who they are. I know here in D.C., I think I said this in one of my previous cards, at any given time in D.C., 1 in 5 young black men are in the prison, in the D.C. jail, or in another jail they've been transported to. But 1 in 5 of black men between the ages of 18 and 29 are at any given time incarcerated. That's like an astronomical figure. Book I would recommend, I've recommended to several of my friends that like to get involved in activism, is a real short read, fantastic writer. He's a law professor. He used to work for the Department of Justice. It's called Let's Get Free, A Hip-Hop Theory of Legal Justice by Paul Butler. And something's coming up with him recently. I think there was like a live stream. I'll post that on my Facebook page or something. It's like a webinar or something, or is it just a speaking engagement? Something's coming up with Paul Butler. Okay, so what she was talking about, okay, I talked about that live streamer that I thought was sort of oversimplifying things. So it's an issue, it's a specific issue that I'm not entirely familiar with, but I've heard this purity test argument as a way to dismiss concerns. But anyhow, I don't know if it's totally disconnected if you look at it through that lens, but yeah. So maybe it's a situation I'm not totally familiar with. But also, somebody wanted me to talk a little bit more about Charles wanted me to talk a little bit more about like identity politics and intersectionality politics, which is really nothing. Intersectionality, like I said, is a method of organizing, bringing different groups together to work on common issues that affect them all. And identity politics, and like I said in 2 previous parts, is like a artificial construction to explain certain behavior patterns, but it's not formalized into an ideology or even a specific political practice. So it's an artificial construct that is often used by people that want to deny white supremacy in a lot of ways. It's like, or to deny real issues of gender inequity, homophobia, transphobia. They trump up this, oh, you're just playing identity politics. Identity politics is taking away from, well, listen to me, I'm the proletariat bros. It's only about classism, and that's all. Classism only. So, anyhow, okay. So, yeah. Classism, again, is not a completely binary thing. There's so many things that play into that. And again, that's where we get to critical thinking and nuance and seeing the interconnectedness of a lot of our struggles. But I'm going to sign off for now. From time to time, I'm going to post resources on my page to follow up on this series. And maybe at some point I'll get to Racism 201. A little bit more advanced, and that would take more research on my part as well. But I'm willing to do that if people think that's like a useful way to spend my time with live streaming. Okay, so I'm going to sign off. Thank you for everyone. Thank you for folks that are trying to expand their horizons in this way and really want to be part of becoming a white ally or white accomplice to destroy white supremacy in this country. That want to be part of that and want to challenge themselves to become better allies and accomplices. You can do it. Just like I said, just try and educate yourself, seek out resources, practice humility, empathy, not centering yourself in the middle of things, not personalizing. You can do it. So anyway, thanks for joining me on this series. I hope you got something out of it. Okay? Peace. Love you all.